record the class, and it will get posted. And each week I have a page called Zoom Session Recordings. And so I post the YouTube URL for each class. Now, please remember that that doesn't give you permission not to show up. But what I want to do is if there is an issue, I want to be sure that if someone does miss something, they can go back and catch it. So first off, I wanted to ask if there are, what questions you have, what comments you have about Monday's class. And some of you have gone ahead and posted your first posting on the discussion. Others have not yet. Please, those of you who haven't posted, do so. Let's keep that dialogue going. Also, please read what your classmates are saying. The purpose of these is to really exchange ideas. And since this is a communications class, we want you to communicate, both here and online. I have posted at least a little bit of response to everyone who has already posted on that. So I will try and keep up. I will admit that I have, since I'm not a full-time instructor anymore, I do have other things in my life. So I might not get to things right away, but I will get to them. And I guarantee you that sometimes on the weekend, there will be days when I don't even turn the computer on. So don't be bothered if you don't hear from me much on the weekend, because I do like to have an occasional day off, as does anyone else. But be assured that I do check when I am working, and I am off and on even when I'm not here. I'll check my email. I will get back to you if you send an email, have a problem, whatever, as soon as I am able. So, having said that, comments. We talked a lot about, certain aspects of communication last class. This class, really, I want you guys to tell me what you've learned, and not only what you've learned about communication, conflict management, the issues that are related to that, self-disclosure, because we want to talk about that tonight as well. Self-disclosure is an important concept. What I'd like you to do is each of you tell me what you learned on Monday. I'd like to get some feedback on this. And part of the reason is, as I said on Monday, this is the first time I've taught this class. I have had a lot of experience communicating because I've had a long life. I'm not necessarily an expert, but I've run into every single one of the problems we've seen so far in my time. So I can, I do have a base of knowledge, and I'm hoping I can expand it with this class because as things generally go at College America, once you agree to teach a class, you're stuck with it. It's sort of like the warning, never take on a task that you don't want to have for life. We all know that in our families. If you show your family that you can cook, you sometimes become chief cook. And I've been struggling with that for a long time, because there's a lot of things that I like to do, but I don't like to have to be the only one. So anyway, let's hear from you. Don't all speak at once. Uh-huh. Hope, would you be so kind as to close the door, please? Thank you. Reduce the background noise here. Okay, so you, and actually, accommodating and avoiding can sound like the same thing. But they're not quite. You know, avoiding, accommodating is a form of engagement. You are actively saying, yeah, okay, if you want to do that, that's okay. And it's perfectly legitimate. Almost all of us use that sometimes. Even if we're more of the competitive, aggressive style, we all use it sometimes because sometimes we honestly don't care. You know, okay, if it's important to you, okay, I don't care. And if you're in any sort of you know, close relationship, whether it's just a pure friendship or a romantic relationship or a parental relationship or anything else, you're going to do that sometimes. How? Oh, good. So you accommodated that. Are you happy with that result? And you don't have to answer questions like that if you don't want to. Okay. So now he knows that you are willing to accommodate him. Perhaps he'll be more accommodating to you in the future. Because there's the give and take. Personal relationships are something we'll get into later at the end of the class, at the end of, you know, the mod. And communication in personal relationships is sort of dependent on the stage of the relationship you're in. In the early stages, it's a little awkward as you're learning how each other think and how you deal with life. And then as you spend more time together, as I said on Monday, my wife and I have been married for over 40 years. We've known each other for about 45 years. So we know each other pretty well. And rarely do we have a major disagreement. Usually there's some irritation because, oh, like yesterday, I left something on a counter that had a staple sticking up out of it because I was doing something else. And then I just flat forgot about it. And she came along and stuck it on her finger. She was mad at me, as she had every right to be. You know, I was careless. And at that point, you're very accommodating. I'm very sorry. I didn't mean to do that. I won't. I'll be more attentive in the future. Whatever. But that's about the extent of it. It lasts for a little while, and that's it. The research on the response to stimulus, especially the anger response or the hurt response or whatever, is that the physiological part, because we all feel that. You get that feeling in the pit of your stomach, maybe get a little lightheaded because your blood pressure drops, or maybe you turn red because your blood pressure rises or whatever. That lasts 90 seconds. And that's it. After that, we're choosing to stay in that mental state. It's one of the reasons that it's a good idea in a discussion, especially if you're having a disagreement and you find yourself getting angry, take that deep breath, wait that 90 seconds, let that physiological response drop off so that your more rational mental response can take over. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to make the right decision, but the other thing it does is it keeps you from making the biggest mistake in interpersonal communications, which is getting upset and saying something without thinking about it. And we've all done it. right? Fantastic. No, no, no. That verbal confrontation can have its value, but a lot of times it doesn't. Yeah, right. Well, that's great. I'm glad to hear that because that is perhaps he's getting the message. Perhaps he's fine. Yeah, well, perhaps he's finding that he can't really push your buttons, even though you think he's pushing your buttons. You're not letting him know it. And when they don't, people are like that. If they, some people, if they can push your buttons, they just keep pushing and pushing and pushing until you do something, or until they get bored. Yeah. Well, yeah, and he may try again. He may try again, but if you just maintain that calm about it, he'll see. Well, okay, that's not going to work. Yeah, let's find some better way to communicate. Yeah, so that's great. Um, and again, each of these styles has its effectiveness. Um, the competitive style, which is one of the ones I talk about, is the style that says I have to win because if I don't win, I lose. And it is a style that is very common. Um, we see it in certain types of personalities that go into some kinds of work. Um, Litigation lawyers are that way. They have to win. And quite frankly, if you need one on your side, it's good to have one who has to win. Yeah, you are. But still, um, I have, and they're that way as a style. I will sort of an aside. I'll tell you an experience I had. I told you last class that I negotiated a lot of contracts, and a lot of them ended up in litigation. And so I was doing a lot of depositions I would do probably once a year. I'd have to go to some place and spend a couple of days being deposed. And one time I was in New York, and the lawyers that we had come up to New York, and we're sitting in the law offices, and I've got my lawyer. By the way, if you ever get deposed, take a lawyer. I don't care what it costs. Take a lawyer with you. They protect you. You don't want to go alone. But I had my lawyer with me, my corporate, my company's attorney, and we're sitting there, and his job really is to keep me from saying something stupid, right? And so I spent a day in their offices in Philadelphia, just practicing, just going over the rules. And by this time, I'd done this several times, so I understood the rules pretty well. But we get up to New York, and we spend a couple of days there. And at one point, my attorney and the attorney for the other side were literally nose to nose screaming at each other across the table. Literally. And then later on that night, they went out and had a beer together. They'd gone to law school together and were good friends. So the whole thing was show, all show. And I just laughed when I realized that. I said, I'm now convinced it's all about theater. So, a lot of times that's what you have to understand is that for many people, especially the issue of winning, it's more about the show than it is about the result. So the competitive style is what we call a zero-sum game. If you win, I lose. If I win, you lose. And there's no middle ground. There's no place where both of us feel like we've come out okay. Whereas the consultative, the collaborative, the compromise, the whole idea there is that there's some situation in the middle where both parties feel like they're happy with the result. And that is something that says it's not a zero-sum game, but that both sides can win. The consequence of that, of course, is that both sides can also lose if you can't come to agreement. So, there's just lots of variance on this. None of these styles is inherently the best in all situations. Some of them are better in some situations than others. Okay. So thank you, Hope. Okay, and Felicia, thank you. So who's next? What did you learn? Or what do you want to integrate into your style?
Right now, I found a online the Hurry window application for that, so my friends see kind of how that looks to me. The things that are known to you, not known to you, but known to others.
Yeah. Known to you, but not others, and nobody knows.
Yeah.
I was actually talking with my wife about that because her first degree was in sociology before she went to PT school, and so she was familiar. She wasn't quite familiar with the name, but she knew the concept. And we were talking about it, and when you look at it, the hidden window between people who know each other well is very small. The other thing is that the hidden window between people you've just met and is very large. But we got to talking about that unknown quadrant, and I realized, remember on Monday I gave the example of playing a tape from my past that I'd sworn would never happen to my, when I talking to my daughter. That was a hidden part to me. That was an unknown part. I thought that was gone. I didn't realize it was even there. So that was unknown to me. Now it has become known to me and to my daughter and to my wife and now to you guys. But now it's known to me. And when it's known in the future, I can avoid doing that. And indeed, I never did that again because I thought about it. And when I felt like I really wanted to react in the way that I had been reacted to as a child, I would think, nope, I don't want to go there. Is there a better way to do this? And sometimes the better way to do that was to look at my child and say, go to your room. We cannot talk about this now. And then talk about it later when I'm. Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, that was a rule in our house. Yeah, that happens. That happens. And, as part of growing up, it's part of finding their legs, but they also need to learn that screaming at anybody, parents included, is really not a good idea. But we saw that, I mean, it's a problem that's been known. When in the 1950s, there was a movie made called Rebel Without a Cause. And it was about teenagers. And the Rebel Without a Cause was a kid played by James Dean. It was one of the 3 movies he made before he was killed in a motorcycle accident. And he was, the bad boy from across town, dating the girl, the daughter of the rich guy, And so the relationships there and the screaming at each other was typical for the time. It was actually fairly accurate. It was accurate in terms of the view of what was at that time my generation and the dealing with our parents' generation. Not everybody had that, but it was the kind of mythology that was there. But it was exactly that, screaming at each other over the dinner table, and then the daughter storming out of the house and going up and meeting up with the bad boy and going off. And it really is, it really showed the total lack of effectiveness of that kind of interaction. Looking back on it now, at the time, I looked at it and I said, yeah, this is typical. But now, looking back on it, it shows just how dysfunctional all of that was. And that was part of the lesson of the movie, I think. But it really was a very interesting to think back on it now. And of course, it's been many, many, many years since I've seen it. Obviously, it had an effect on me because it stayed with me. And it was about communication and the lack of communication, and about the mistakes that we make in communication. And the biggest one being blowing your top, getting angry. At that point, when you can actually see this, I mean, it doesn't physically happen, but you can literally see people's ears folding in when you start yelling. They stop paying attention. At that point, you've lost everyone. So that's one of the reasons that we suggest that you look at the various styles of dealing with conflict, because that really is, for the most part, if there's no conflict, I mean, if you're just walking down the street talking, there's no big deal. But it's when you have the real or perceived, and quite frankly, there's an old phrase in marketing that all reality is perceived. So if you perceive it, it's real to you, at least at the time. And that includes the conflict. So we have to remember that we can choose conflict, or we can choose not to have conflict. Okay, who's next? Okay, we've heard from a few. Not everybody's looking at you, Yulisa.
I have no comment.
You have no comment. All right. I won't force a comment. How did things come through on Monday, Amber? You heard everything pretty well? Good. I'm glad. Pardon? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that does happen. Happened this morning as I was recording my morning class. Your internet connection isn't stable. Okay, well, all right. And we're sitting in the room. Warm? Well, it has been a funny day weather-wise, hasn't it? Yeah. Yep. Well, everybody responds differently. I can be in a room with people who shouldn't be having any other issues going on, mainly 30-year-olds, group of 30-year-olds, and half of them will be freezing and half of us will be roasting. So you can't win on that one. Everybody perceives temperatures differently. Anyway, Stephanie, do you have something to say?
The only thing I really have to say is that I found it interesting that I can't remember exactly word for word, but I know if basically we communicate better, it does define us in different aspects. We're socially happier in our relationship. Gosh, I'm trying to honestly find it now because it kind of hit me when I was reading it, but I wish I could remember exactly what it was saying, but it basically said when we communicate better, it does an aspect of things. And for some reason, I just thought maybe it would only do one or two things, but it does a number of things like good relationships, lasting relationships, not only for boyfriend, girlfriend, but for coworkers, for boss, for children. So I just found that interesting, to be honest.
Great, thank you. That's communication's the key. We talked about a couple of things. One is man is the only animal, as you know, that actually communicates in abstract symbols. There are animals who obviously communicate in different ways. We lived in Australia for a while, and we learned that there were two different kinds of sheepdog. There is, would you let them in, please? Oh, well, Dan's got the key.
Two different kinds of what did you say?
Sheepdogs. And after we get done with a little visit from Dan and Thane, we'll get back to that topic.
Okay.
If you want to review your resume, if you want to help you put together a cover letter, take a look at the job description.
Thank you.
Look at your social media page to kind of give you that clear perspective of whether or not this is something that would raise a red flag for you as a prospective employer. That's so important these days, because that's one of the first places that a lot of prospective employers go once they fit into you. You know, this might be a good candidate here. Let's see what they got on. Be really careful about what you put online, because once you type something in and posted it, it is literally there forever. It is almost impossible to get that scrub. So be your own scrub. But let me know if there's anything to do for you from that perspective. And of course, if you want to get a little bit of practice on mock interviewing, let me know. I'll write you some tough questions. Which would have you being the hot seat. All right, guys, thank you so much. Okay. Tell me about yourself. There you go.
The old elevator pitch, yep.
Yes. I was like, no. And that's a test question. And if you have literally any other questions or any of those questions, and I'm not right away available, leave a voicemail or contact Thursday. That's 299. And a valuable resource. So we've got you covered here on campus. Yeah, we were lucky to still have them our Denver campus. Everything I told you back before, so very nice. All right, guys, have a nice class, ladies. Take care.
Thank you. See you next week. Yeah, I brag about that. I have the 4-day weekend every week. Pardon? No. Okay. Anyway, talking about the different means of communication, and animals don't use the abstract communication, but they do have communication. We see that with sheepdogs. There are two kinds of sheepdog in terms of the way they communicate. One of them is a barker. The dog will bark and run and chase sheep and herd them up. And the other is an eye dog. The dog doesn't make a sound. He just looks. And the sheep run. So he's communicating something in a nonverbal way. So it's a different style. And they get the message and go. And watching these dogs in competition is really fascinating. But even more so, watching them when they're actually working in the field. they have this unbelievable ability to communicate. And the handler, the owner, all they do is whistle. That's all. And so the communication works that way. So there's lots of ways to communicate. And so the barkers communicate just sort of like, just chasing them, and it's almost like a game. The eye dogs are really intimidating to watch. It's kind of fun to watch when they do that. But that's two different kinds of communication. Animals do communicate. There is no doubt about that. All you have to do is watch a school of fish or a flock of birds. They all do something at once. Why is that? How do they communicate it? Well, we're not sure. We don't know, but it works. But they don't have abstract thoughts. They're not debating about, the history of the universe. They're not doing any of that. They don't have that kind of verbal symbology that we use when we talk. But animals show us really the incredible value of nonverbal communication. Now, I don't mean, the barks and the bird songs and everything that actually are their own vocalizations and their own communication by vocal. But a lot of it is, all you have to do is watch two squirrels in your backyard. They don't say a word to each other. But, pardon? They chase each other, yes. Yes, my daughter calls them rats with good press. With good press. But they do. They communicate somehow, but they're not making a sound that we know of. So anyway, there's lots of ways to communicate. Okay, who's next? We haven't heard from several. Couple. You have anything you'd like to add, Amber? Okay. You, Lisa? No? Okay. You don't have to. I won't force it. But I would encourage you to speak up in class. Because we like to hear, the thing is that if you don't speak up, we don't know the good stuff that's in your head. And there's good stuff in your head, no matter who you are. So please don't hesitate to share that with us. So we've gone through the various forms of conflict. Can be called conflict resolution, can be called conflict management. It can be called a lot of different things, but really it is, how do we overcome differences? And remember that differences don't have to actually exist. All they have to do is be perceived by one or the other party. And those perceptions come to us in a lot of ways. If we are, and many of those perceptions, we're going to spend a lot of time next week talking about nonverbal communication. And it's appropriate. Remember one of the videos, Celeste Fairchild is talking about nonverbal communication being 93% of communication. And I still have a hard time with it being that high a percentage. I'm not going to argue with her. She's studied it a lot more than I have. But it seems I know that nonverbal communication is important for all of us. So I just want to be sure that we spend some time next week on that topic. But this is verbal. Now, let's talk about the other side of vocal. Remember we talked about verbal communication can either be vocal or written. And written communication has the advantage that you can think about what you're saying before you send it off. We talked about some people have a rule that before you send off that angry email retort that you have just dreamed up, think about it for a few minutes, and maybe you'll end up just deleting it or severely modifying it. Um, yeah, it is useful, and emails too, because we see a lot of things. I see a lot of people that send off. I'm not real active on Facebook, but I do have a number of people who have friended me on Facebook, and I see their posts, and sometimes I just want to say, shut up. You know, you are just being silly here. And I never do. I never do, because it won't do any good. But beyond that, the purpose of it, if they're really being silly, you can't say that in a Facebook post. I mean, you can't explain why. It's like anything else. Anything somebody says to counter it takes 10 times as many words. That's why people post things and nobody says anything, because it's too much work. It's also why people don't check. I had a cousin who used to forward me all these crazy things, and he would never check things. And I'd check him out, and I'd write him these lengthy emails back, and I'd get a response from him that says, "Thanks, I never thought about that." And I thought, yeah, well, when are you going to start checking? But he never did. And I remember one time he sent me a picture of what was supposed to be a Dell laptop computer that somebody had broken the case open, and they found all this stuff in there that they claimed was a keystroke tracker. And I looked at it and I said, Danny, do you realize, looking at it, it doesn't fit in the case? They can't close the case on that thing. So this is a fake. So at that point he says, oh, I guess you're right. So, and it was not that it's impossible to track keystrokes. We know it is, but not with something that you can't even put inside the computer. It has to be something else. So it's spending the time. And that's why written communication can be much more effective in some ways than verbal communication. With written communication, there's a couple of things going on. Number one, yes, you can be a lot more discerning about what you write. You can spend some time thinking about it. You can go back and delete it. You can correct it. You can modify it. You can go back through and see the stupid spelling mistakes you made and fix those so you don't look like a total idiot. And all those things are part of it. But the other part is that you have to be, you need to be careful, because you don't have the body language that goes with it. And body language tells people a lot. They can't hear your voice. Voice inflection, facial expression, these are called paralanguage, because they don't have the rules. Our language has grammatical rules, and our verbs and our nouns are conjugated and declined according to specific rules, so that people know that you've used a verb that says that something happened in the past or something might happen in the future. But with the paralanguage, the facial expressions, the voice intonations and stuff don't have those rules, but it's a very rich source of information, which is why 93% of our communication is nonverbal when we're talking to people. But that rich source is lost. You don't have that. You can tell jokes. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've known of a lot of comedians, and I really enjoyed a number of comedians when I was younger that I saw on television. I could see their jokes, I could see their faces, I could see their expressions, I could see their pratfalls, I could see all the things that went with their verbal and physical jokes. And then they'd write a book, and it would not be funny, because the joke was in the non-verbal part. It was in the facial expression. And it doesn't work. And that's one of the things, that's one of the reasons that I suggest not, unless you actually know the people you're communicating with very, very well, family members, very good friends, be careful about jokes. Humor is very much culturally specific. Many years ago, when my wife and I were backpacking around the world for a couple of years, we spent some time in New Zealand. And we were in Auckland, and we went to a movie. And the movie was The Goodbye Girl, with Ellen Burstyn and Richard Dreyfuss. And it was a very popular movie. It was based on a play, and it was a very funny play if you happened to understand New York humor, because that's where it was. So we're sitting in the theater with a bunch of New Zealanders, a bunch of Kiwis, and the movie's going, and we're laughing like crazy. And everybody in the theater is staring at us like we're nuts, because it had absolutely no meaning to them whatsoever. So humor is something that doesn't cross cultural boundaries. There's a story about a comedian, a very famous comedian in the United States, who was in Japan and telling jokes. And of course, he didn't speak Japanese. And so his audience in Japan, more people now speak English than in the past, but in the 1960s, which is when this occurred, English was not widely spoken in Japan. So most of his audience had to have the jokes translated. And he was just having a great time. I mean, the audience was just laughing uproariously at all of his jokes, going on and on and on. And at the end of the show, he walks off the stage and says, I guess I really wowed them. They were having a lot of fun. They were really getting my jokes. And the translator said, no, they weren't. At the end of your joke, I said, joke over, laugh now. And that's when they'd laugh. So it just doesn't work. So you have to be careful with humor. Humor, there are some universal humors, and there are some jokes that work across this country, but but so much of it has to do with delivery. And the delivery on a written page is not very easy to pull off. There are people who can do that. There are people who write very well, very funny pieces, but they are the people that if they tried to tell you a joke in public, you'd look at them and say, why is that funny? Because it's a different style. Totally different. So you have to be careful with humor. And humor is one of the things that is most easily taken wrongly. I can't remember, something was said recently by one of the political people about something that was going on, and it caused quite an uproar. And the excuse was that he was just being funny. Well, it wasn't taken funny, and you have to be kind of careful about that. Humor is the easiest thing to take wrong. Some stories are wonderful. Some stories are wonderful. My mother-in-law at her church this Sunday, Easter Sunday, was told a story about a little kid was asked the question, what did Jesus say when his tomb opened on Easter Sunday? And the kid says, I know. And the pastor says, okay, what did Jesus say when the tomb opened? Ta-da! Was the answer. Now that's kind of funny if you understand if your kids have ever done that to you, because that's a kid's answer. But I've got some humor impaired cousins who would not find that funny at all. They would find it sacrilegious. So again, you have to be careful. And if someone's offended by that, I'm sorry, I apologize. I just thought it's a great kid's story. But just be aware that humor is something to not necessarily avoid, but to be very, very careful about, because it doesn't work. So you don't want to be criticized for having insulted someone that way. So the verbal communication has, or a written communication has the advantage of being something that, at least theoretically, you can think about. The disadvantage in that you can't convey subtle meaning unless you happen to be incredibly broadly literate, meaning a vocabulary, a working vocabulary of tens of thousands of words instead of the normal 1,500 or so that we all use on a daily basis. And even then, you're dependent on your audience understanding what you say. The broader your vocabulary is, the more likely you are to lose your audience. And that's not that your audience isn't intelligent. They're just not exposed to the vocabulary anymore. We're not taught those things anymore. So, again, think about it. Got something funny to share? Okay, I just, if it's amusing, I'd like to know it. I always need new material. Pardon? Well, it's all right. It's all right. I don't mean to embarrass you then, Ulysses. Sorry. I apologize. So the issue of written communication is something that you need to have. That's part of why your assignment this week is actually to be writing about one of these subjects. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more after we have our break in about 10 minutes. We'll talk about that a little bit more because I'd like to know what people are thinking about doing with that assignment. But written, that's going to be your first exposure in the workplace, is the material you send of a written nature to your prospective employer, whether it's a resume. And resumes are funny. They don't have to be terribly literary. They just have to be of a specific style. But the cover letter that goes along with it has to show that that you have the ability to communicate in writing. And we'll have to do that. If we're in medicine, we're going to have to be able to communicate by writing up notes, writing up summaries of cases. If we're working in the computer field, we may be having to write up readable and usable instructions for using software or equipment. And I don't know about you, but that's one of the biggest deficits in that field. Many years ago in graduate school, we got a very expensive scientific instrument that was made by a Japanese company. And they did not invest in a good writer because the manual was written like it was just transliterated from Japanese, literally. There were LR inversions. The sentence grammar and structure were Japanese sentence grammar and structure written in English. It was impossible to read. So we had to learn how to use it by trial and error, which is not a good thing to do with a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment. You make a mistake and you've got a multi-million-dollar doorstop. That's it. So, writing is something that that we need to be able to do, no matter where we are. Some of you may eventually decide that writing is something you want to do for a living, and that could be technical writing. God knows we need people who can write well for creating these manuals. That's a skill. It's an important skill. Or it may be that you want to do what my daughter does and write fiction for a living. So, either way, you have to be able to do it well and convey your ideas clearly. So, Chad, you have something to say about that?
Process documentation. This is what we do. This is why we do it, and making it so that everyone can understand if they're not familiar with our setup.
Mm-hmm. And where do you work, Chad?
Do tech support for USDA.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. So, comments, questions? You look like you want to say something, Hope. No? Okay. You just took a breath in like you were going to talk. I can understand that. Yeah, I just recently bought a standing desk so I could stay awake in front of the computer. Yeah, those are good. But anyway, okay, let's go ahead and break a couple of minutes early. Come back at 7:15, and we'll talk about the assignment for this week, and yes, the paper. And I've also got an assessment that I loaded in this afternoon for this week. A quiz, yes. Yeah, it's a quiz, a real quiz, not a written assessment. At least not this week. So we'll reconvene at 7:15. And Stephanie, I'm going to shut the recording part of this off, but I'm going to leave the meeting itself open.
Okay. Just really quick, Michael, you said you would be able to give me a hard copy of chapters 4 through 7.
Yes.
Can you leave those at?
I was talking with Chantel. Thank you. I've been waiting to hear that for ages. Oh, no. Retirement is just working harder for less money. You know. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, basically, pretty much I started working here at the age most people retire. Yeah. Because I couldn't see sitting at home. 65, 66, along in there. Although more and more of us are continuing to work, and it's not because in many cases, it's because they need to. And in my case, it's more because I just don't want to be at home all the time. I like having 5 days a week off. So let me tell you, but I don't think I'd want to have nothing. I mean, yeah. Yeah. My dad was the same way. He retired from the military and he was too young, so he went to work. Yeah. It depends. Yeah. Most people, there's a couple of things. Most organizations would have an age of retirement that depended on the level in the company. Like many of them, chief executive, chief C-level, chief information officer, chief executive officer, et cetera. A lot of companies require them to retire at 65. My mother-in-law was a legal secretary, and 65 came and went, and she wasn't going anywhere. And she was working for a large legal firm in downtown Denver, and they had a mandatory retirement age of 72, and they threw her out at 72 because they had the rules. And she could easily have worked another 10 years. And she wanted to. And some of them wanted her to. Uh-huh. It depends. As I said, there's a lot of, right now, the reason most people used to retire at 65 is that's when they were eligible for Social Security. Now the Social Security eligibility age is going up. And it depends on when you were born as to when you are, what age you're eligible to draw Social Security, the full Social Security benefits. You can still retire, take your benefits early and get a reduced benefit for life. But once you reach that official age, whether it's 65, for me it was 65. My wife was just a few years younger than me, and her retirement age, 66. You have to start taking Social Security at 72. So there's another aspect of it. That's another reason that my mother-in-law's law firm had a mandatory retirement age of 72. People had to take, and she didn't take any Social Security until then. And then you get more. You get a bigger payment. Yeah. So she's working more now.
Yeah. Yes, that's kind of what
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, so retirement does depend. And as you know, as far as, I don't think the school has any mandatory retirement age. There are other rules. If you have tax deferred retirement plans, IRAs, 401ks, that sort of thing, the tax deferred ones, you have to start taking that money at age 70 and a half. So you have, they call it a required minimum distribution. So you have to take that money out of your retirement accounts. They don't tell you what you have to do with it other than pay taxes on it. But, people so there's another break point at which a lot of people will quit. But some of us just I like to teach. I enjoy it. So I'll be here until they fire me, I guess. I don't know. Or until, since I'm going to have one daughter living in Denmark and the other living in Australia, until I decide to leave the country. So, which is another possibility. So we'll see. We'll see. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk about the assignment for week 1. And the assignment is to write a 1 to 3 page paper on one of 3 topics: importance of interpersonal communication, conflict in interpersonal communication, or self-disclosure and interpersonal communication. This requires that you look for to find 2 references, which means your text can be 1. That's fine. But you're going to have to look elsewhere to get more information, because your text, the text that you have is a little hard to read, I will admit, because they do all their citations in text and they're not proper they're not APA. I don't know what format they are. Yeah, I don't know what it is. It really is a confusing style, and it makes it hard to read. So, the text itself that we have is 1, but you need to look up something else as well. And believe me, there's a lot. You've got videos, you've got suggested articles in the readings and tools, I think, in the modules. Can't remember if this class has them in readings and tools or in the overview for the week, but you have lots and lots of alternatives. And you may want to look around if you get interested in something and look up something that's different. there are in your text, even though there are references as well that you may want to go ahead and look up. You can probably find them through ProQuest or Sinhall or one of the databases that we have in Shark. So you can probably find those articles easily there. Explain how this topic relates to your goals and reasons for being in school right now. Okay. Communication, as I said, is critical, going to be critical on your job no matter what. So explain how this is going to help you have a better job, have the job you want. And how's that affecting your study here? Find ways to use examples and evidence from personal experience, the textbook and/or outside resources in your paper. So use examples. You know, these are, if you have your own personal stories that you're willing to talk about, don't feel like this is not true confession class. So if there's something that you think that's a good example of what you're talking about out of your own life that you don't mind talking about, this goes back to that self-disclosure. You know, there are things that we've never told anyone. You don't have to tell them here. If you don't want me to know it, please don't. Some questions that may help. In what ways are you having success in this topic, meaning this class? In what ways can you improve? And in light of this information, what might you do to have more success? How might you be able to help others? Because really that's what it boils down to, helping others. So you can use Shark. You can use any of the sources. So again, it is an APA paper, double spaced, 1-inch margins, 12-point font, preferably Times New Roman, but Arial is also just fine. But a plain font. Full title page. Yep. Full title page and a reference page. So the paper itself is 1 to 3 pages, not including the title page and the reference page. I can't imagine you can't come up with at least 1 page, and some of you will probably not have any trouble getting quite a bit more. Use all the APA citation formats. Your grading rubric, when I will get published, your grading rubric will include being in the right format, and grammar, punctuation, all those things. But it also include how thoroughly you have answered these questions. Okay? So it's a file upload, which basically means it's a Word doc. And it can be in .docx or RTF format. I don't care. They all work. They're all Word. I better check on the RTF. I may or may not have specified RTF. Or I might even have not specified a format. But it just won't be a spreadsheet or a PowerPoint or any of that stuff. So a document. The Writing Center. What you should do is take a look at the Writing Center. The Writing Center is what we have in place of the old Smart Thinking that we used to use, which was a place you could submit your paper and within 24 hours you'd get feedback. We went away from that for a lot of reasons. It had some limitations that made it not useful for papers, as in some of our classes that got to be more than a few pages long because they just wouldn't review them. They'd review the first few pages and then stop. So that didn't help. Then we thought, well, we have Laura in the Student Success Center, and we have Katie, our dean, an English teacher that you could use. But they're busy people, and they're only here during the day. Katie's here a lot now on Monday and Wednesday night because she's teaching the class. But for the most part, they're not as available to you. The Writing Center, you do have to make an appointment. and get on there and look at their site, but they will help you with paper structure. They will make sure that you are following the right format, using the right format for references, the right in-text citation format, that sort of thing. They will help you with that. Amber? I thought they would, they were suggesting that you don't submit it on Saturday after 9. I don't think they work that late. 9 a.m. Okay. Mountain. Okay, if you submit it after 9 a.m. on Saturday, you won't get it back in that 24 to 48 hour window. If you submit it during the week, they'll get it back to you. Or tomorrow, really. If you submit it, note that. Let me know that you've done that. I'd like to track this to just see if the system is working as advertised. Because this is my first exposure because we always did everything in-house. Okay, so yeah, let me know and we'll keep track of it. And if that turns into a problem, then I'll be gracious about it. Let's just say it that way. I won't punish you, but generally speaking, and I know that it says deadline for the papers are Saturday at 11:59. I guarantee you, Saturday at 11:59, I'm not on my computer looking to see who's turned things in. So if it's in by Sunday, I'll be happy. After Sunday, then we're getting into late territory. Because quite frankly, I won't even look at it if I look on when I look on Sunday, it's going to be in the afternoon anyway. So don't get too hung up on that. I don't. It's maybe I'm not doing things quite kosher, but that's the way I work. So as I said, I also don't expect you guys to be up there working on your papers at Saturday night at midnight. If you are, I'm liable to be asking, don't you guys have a life? And in some cases, the answer is no. I realize that. When I was a student, that was about the case. But grad students don't have a life. I'll guarantee you. I can understand that. Yeah. Yeah, I did that. Yeah, I understand that one. That's a good one. It's a way not to be bothered. And if the family cooperates, that's great. Yeah, there's that.
Brother will come down.
Yeah. Little siblings, or if you happen to have children, you're already sunk. Ah.
No, 24, 6.5.
I was going to say 23/7. Sleep an hour a day.
That's a lot of sleep.
Yeah.
I think that's, yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
One of the answers that's only 4, not 5. So I put no answer to 5. So have computer number.
What question number is that? Number 10. All right. So let's week 1. I said I'll have to check that one. It might have been wrong in the test bank that I took it out of. Are the others completely wrong? Okay. Yeah. Well, you know which one should be the correct answer. Yeah. 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 Well, you can go back and repeat the test. So you've got 3 tries. Oh, by the way, my view on quizzes, what I call the assessments in weeks 1, 2, and 3 are quizzes. My view on quizzes is that they're learning experiences. So all of my quizzes you can do up to 3 times. It will keep the highest score you get. That'll be what's reported. So you have the opportunity to go back and redo a quiz that you don't like your score. Now, if the quiz is this one's worth what, 30 points?
Yeah.
So if you get 29 out of 30 and you're happy with that, well, I don't blame you. But if you are, if you'd rather have all 30 points, which I don't blame you either, that was my mantra. I'll say that right now. Go back and look at it. You can't ever do worse than your first score. So go back and try. Nice try. Let's see if there's any special notation that says unauthorized student on the attendance sheet here. Did you go in through the module? Go in through the module. Go to modules, module 1 and week 1 assessment 1, because the link in the home page will take you to the wrong quiz. Okay? One that hasn't been published. For all of the assignments, because of the change that we've got, for all of the assignments, don't use the home page with its little boxes, assessment and discussion. The discussions all work, but the assessments and assignments will not. Because I have prepared my own assessment and assignment rather than using theirs. Okay. I'm putting more stuff in. Each week I will have more, and I'll be working on that this week. So I've got week 1 ready. And I'm ready. I'm already thinking about what's going to be the assignments and assessments for week 2. So I will try to stay ahead. Sorry? More than likely, but as I said, Sunday is not going to give me any trouble. As I said, Saturday is one of the days that I sometimes never turn the computer on. Yeah. Yeah. No. Well, yeah, that's true. I was going to say, make sure you do all the checkpoints. Several people did. It's not going to kill you. And I think when you're not used to doing these checkpoints in all your classes, that's a good way to do it, Michael. Yeah, if you have to be up late anyway, you might as well. Yeah. What I have often suggested with the checkpoints is that all of us during the regular days of the week, all of us will get up one of the first things we do, whether we're going to work or coming to school, is turn our computer on. And just sort of like, you get up in the morning, you brush your teeth, you get dressed, turn your computer on, do your checkpoint. Yeah. Well, that would be a bit extreme. Well, find the real key is to find a specific time of the day. I mean, even if it means doing it on your phone on your lunch hour. You all have I presume everyone has a smartphone. And that is a presumption. I've had some students who don't. In fact, I wish I didn't sometimes. But we all have smartphones. Canvas app can be on your smartphone, and you can do the daily checkpoints on your Canvas app on your smartphone. So it's really something to consider. But I would say, pardon, Michael? Oh yeah. Oh no, you can do everything. You can do your assignments on there if you want. I mean, I'd hate to write a paper on a smartphone, but you could. And if you have a tablet that you can also put it onto, but it works pretty well. Whether it's a Mac iOS, or if it's a somebody else's Android operating system, they do work. So that's one thing. And as I said, you can do quizzes. It's fairly easy to do quizzes on the smartphone app. As I said, I wouldn't try to write a paper. But even discussions, people have done discussions. Although you're tempted to cut them short, remember there are some length requirements. Minimally 150 words for you. It's 250 for me when I post. So you have those length requirements. So I think 150 words is probably getting close to the max anyone would ever want to do on a phone. So I'd suggest those be something that you just did on a little more user-friendly device in that respect. But anyway, so let's have any of you thought about this assignment yet? Okay, Michael? On which of the topics? Okay. Yeah, great. This is the kind of thing that one of the things I suggest always is do a draft early. And sometimes the way to do a draft early is just type. Just throw out your ideas. Don't worry about the grammar. Don't worry about the spelling. Get the ideas out. Go clean it up later. But what you don't want to do, what happens altogether too often is you've thought about something and then you start to write and you say, what was it I was thinking about? I can't remember. And it was a great idea. So you really just, also, if you have ideas during the day, you've got a memo function on your smartphone. Put it in there, even just a few keywords. Just do it in there so that you don't lose it. Because I can't tell you how many times I've had a world-beating ideas and then forgotten them. Of course, my idea of a world-beating idea might be not very much, but might not work. But it was, I thought, a good idea. And so that's when I started really learning to use the memo function on my smartphone. I decided to join the 21st century finally. So, okay, I hope you were going to say something. Please. Yeah. That's always valuable. Any professional writer will tell you that the best thing you can do with anything you write, and most, there are exceptions to this, but the best thing you can do with anything you write is step back from it. Some of the best writers will have 5 or 6 projects going at once, and they'll spend a lot of time on one, and then they'll set it aside and spend time on another, and then come back to the first one. So that's not unusual. And it's yeah. Well, submit it when you're comfortable. Let's look at that. Let's do that. Generally speaking, we want a couple of references for anything. In the course media page in Course Home, you'll find the reference to the text. You'll also find it in the syllabus. The syllabus has as good a formatted reference to this text as is available. It's not quite APA format because it does not name the city of the publication, of the publisher. And so I thought, well, if the school is happy with that, then I'm going to be happy with it. I'm not going to worry about it. So, but that's where you can find it. In the syllabus.
I found it under.
Yeah, I'll go.
Okay. And about that
Okay.
advice strategies question,
So,
should we just answer the same thing if it's the right one, or just say no answer?
If
The problem, like on the quiz, like, should we just go with the pretty much right answer, or just go with the no
go
answer?
with the best answer, if everything is correct and they've just made a mistake. So if you go to course information, yeah,
so I found the book information modules, which one the course home dash ebook thing. Yeah, like then at the top it has the text word.
okay, all right. So go back here to the week 1 assignment. Okay, so the week 1 assignment. So Michael and Hope have gotten some of the work done. What about everybody else? Have you chosen a topic? That's one of the things I'd like to know. And the reason I'd like to know is because if you haven't chosen a topic yet, you need to tonight. You need to get started. Because, again, written communication, as I said, written communication requires a lot more thought than just conversing with people, because you really have to get the subtleties of that communication in words now. Whereas in a verbal conversation, the subtleties are written all over your body. As you sit, as you move, as you fidget, whatever you do when you're talking. If you look at actors on a stage, body language is critical to a dramatic performance. And drama here, I include comedy and everything else. I mean, a stage performance. And actors will gesture, and they will exaggerate those gestures because, of course, when you are 100 yards away in the audience, they don't look exaggerated. And they exaggerate facial expressions because you're not close enough. So they convey a lot. And they can convey a lot with just a gesture or a raised eyebrow can do an incredible amount. But you can't put that on paper. And in fact, it doesn't even, if you look at a script for a play, it doesn't even have some of those. It's the actors putting that additional material in. So let's see. So who else? So let's go around and let me know what topic you are at least thinking about doing.
I want to do the importance of interpersonal communication.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephanie.
You're welcome.
That's fine too. Okay, so Felicia's going to do that one too. Self-disclosure? Yes, good. I'm glad somebody's going to do that. That's what you've done? Excellent. Okay, excellent. Great. Okay, well, make a choice.
Yeah. I've been working on it.
Yeah, make a choice. Elisa, have you picked out something you want to do? Okay, excellent. Importance of interpersonal communication. Got it. All right, excellent. Good distribution on that. I'm glad to hear it, and I'll be looking forward to seeing those first drafts or those papers. Again, if you have the time, and I suggest using the Writing Center. It's something that we really are trying to emphasize. It's available to everyone in the system of the Center for Excellence in Higher Education. And there are people that's their job. So make use of them. And they will help a lot. Let's see, is there anything else? All right. All right, so let's move back out of there. I will, so I'll check that assessment, question 10, but if you see something that says, what are the 5 blah, 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 and there's nothing with 5 choices, pick the best one. Pick the one that has the most correct choices, okay? There should be 5, because we saw that in the window on page 415 of chapter 6. So there should be 5. And so I suspect that's an artifact of how the test copied over somehow, because it, that should have been correct. Call it the importance of, yeah, I would give it the title of exactly that, the importance of interpersonal communication, or conflict resolution. Yeah, excellent. That's a good title. I mean, that clearly states what your topic is. And an APA paper, there should be an opening paragraph, the purpose of this paper, blah, 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 and then the body of the paragraph, and then a conclusion at the end. So don't forget all of those characteristics. The conclusion should be supported by the information in between the introduction and the conclusion paragraph. That's something that is the case, is necessary, because I guarantee you I'll be reading them. I may not read them with a fine-tooth comb, so I might miss a misspelling or maybe a grammatical error, but I will read them. I will have quite a few of these things to read. Discussion posts. I also read those. We had a student in one class who decided that he thought discussion posts were not graded or not really read. And so he just wrote, something like blah, 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 blah for 150 words. And then he was sitting in the dean's office explaining what he was doing. because the instructor looked at it and said, no. So we actually do read them. And quite frankly, what I like to read all of these things for is I have yet to have a class where my students didn't teach me something. Now, as I've said before, I teach a lot of the medical classes, but I also teach algebra and statistics as well. Some of you may be taking those classes. But I teach a lot of the medical classes, and we do a lot of stuff in the medical classes where people have to research drugs. Well, I know a lot about drugs, but I don't know everything, and especially not the very newest of drugs. And so my students always teach me something fascinating. So I read these things with a what can I learn from this student attitude. And almost always I learn something. So bless you. All right.
I have a repeat question on the assessment as well.
Is there a repeat?
Yeah, it's number 25 is the same as number 15.
That shouldn't have happened.
Yeah, it's the whole while you're in conflict.
Well, you ought to be able to get 2 correct ones there. I've just noted. In the future, I'll just change that out. And in future versions, that will not be a problem. Let's move a little bit ahead. We've talked about, let's get some reviews here. When we are talking about interpersonal communication, what do we mean by interpersonal communication?
Communication between somebody more than necessarily brief like talking to quick as store, unless there's somebody you actually know outside of that content.
Right.
Doesn't really fit, but something like this.
Right. Right. So it's somebody you have the potential to have some influence on, and someone that you know well enough that the communication has some meaning. Yes. There are times when it changes, however. You know, we talk about you go into, let's just say you go into a restaurant, you have a server, you talk with them, you know, that's really, if that's the only time you're ever in that restaurant, that's really not an interpersonal relationship. But if you go in often, and when we lived down in Arvada, we had a favorite Thai restaurant in Arvada that we'd go to every couple of weeks, and we got to know the owners and the serving staff. And so it became very much, the communication became interpersonal when we got to know them. When we'd walk in the door and they'd greet us by name, you know you've got a personal relationship. So that changed. But until that time, it wasn't. So interpersonal is something that is always within your own mind. How well do I know this person? You know, because you can walk into a restaurant and if it's a good restaurant, the serving staff's going to treat you like you're a long lost customer. You know, but if it's the first time you're in there, you're not. But if, you know, under other circumstances, it might be different. So okay, so interpersonal conversation or interpersonal communication is between people who have some relationship of some sort. What are the levels, though? I mean, let's talk about levels of communication. We've heard about it in here in some contexts. In the context of the kind of communication you have between your family members, say your siblings, is going to be different than the kind of communication most of us, at least, have with our parents or with our own children. Our communications on the job will depend on you talking to the boss. And who's the boss? Well, there's your immediate supervisor, but what about further up the line? If you're in a huge multinational company, you're probably not going to be talking very far up the line. But if you're in a smaller organization, you may talk all the way up to the president of the company. But the conversations are different, Amber. Right? Yeah. Cite the book unless you actually go to that citation and read what it says, because they've given you just a little piece of the information in that source. So if you go to the source, use that. If not, you can say, yeah, okay, the proper way to do that is to cite the source that's listed there, but in, and then the book. So what you're saying is that I've taken a little bit of this source. This source is not from the author of the text, but it's from a reference. But all you've seen is some quotation from that. So you haven't really gone, but you still should attribute it to the originator. So you would say, Jones F in, and then the source. Okay. It's a kind of a convoluted one. It's not one you see a lot. But where you see it to a great extent is in collections of essays, compilations. There may, if you were reading a set of essays on, say, the structure of the United States Constitution, just as an example, you might read something written by some constitutional scholar in 1953, but it's now being collected in this volume that was published in, say, 2010. So you would say Jones, and then the name of the publication, the name of the essay in this compilation with so-and-so as the editor. I mean, so it really gets a little kind of nested and convoluted, but it is a proper attribution to say that you've taken only that someone else's work and you found it here instead of going back to the original. Okay. Okay. Does that I hope that makes sense. Okay. Yeah, some of these things, there are places you can go and check up on. You all should have an APA handbook. Were you given that? Yeah, so refer to that. That should have all of those things in it. That should have all of them in it. So, okay. Oh, by the way, this is for Stephanie. I've left a package for you at the front desk. It should be there with Roberta in the morning.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. When we talk about self-disclosure, what do we really mean? Yeah. Okay. Does it have to be with somebody else? What about that hidden window in the Johari window, the hidden pain? The things that the unknown pain. The things that you discover about yourself. The things that you don't know. Can you suddenly come to that self-realization? Isn't that self-disclosure? Okay, so it can be to you, but you're right. Usually we're talking about somewhere out there, but it can be to you from someone else, though, when you realize that someone actually has a picture of you that isn't quite matching up to your self-image. Okay. Point of fact, point of example. I worked with a guy who his self-image was that he was highly intelligent and much more intelligent than the rest of us, and let us know he had a very, very strong self-opinion. Thought he was really, really good. He was very jealous when one of his academic colleagues got a Nobel Prize and he didn't. And he didn't have a clue that we had a whole bunch of people whose image of him, his self-disclosure from his behavior and our image of him, was that he was an absolute idiot, a self-absorbed little jackass. And he had no idea. So that's something too, so the image that you unwittingly project is also the disclosure to others of who you are. Now remember that goes through their filters too. And we all have filters. But when it comes, a lot of times when you find out what other people think of you really, it's a real eye-opener. It can make you really go back and think about what you think you are and who you think you are. Fortunately, most of us, I think, come across pretty much for what we are. If anything, our self-disclosure, the way many of us have been brought up in this society, our self-disclosure is actually a step down from how other people see us. Okay, we're harder on ourselves than other people think we ought to be, and that's not unusual in this society. You grow up in a society where perfection is expected, and if you're not perfect, you're nothing, right? And a lot of us grew up with that sort of attitude in the older generation from us. And since we weren't perfect, then we must be really awful. And it takes a lot of, and so we have this image of ourselves that really isn't true, because most of us are pretty darn good at what we do and enjoy doing it. So the people see something that we were trained not to see. So there's lots of ways that disclosure goes back and forth. And it really ties into how we interact with other people around that self-disclosure. And it's somewhat startling sometimes when we realize that other people think much more highly of us than we think they ought to. And that's something to remember. Now, as I say, there's two extremes. There are people that really think that really don't behave the way they think, and they're not as good as they think, or whatever. And there are others as well. So then there's that window of the openness, the open window between you and the people who are close to you, the known window. And that's what we want to have with our friends, as big as possible. And then we have the parts that we hide from some of the people around us. We all know people that we know better than to say anything to, because we know that the instant we say anything, it's going to be on Facebook or Twitter, or the whole world is going to be informed. So we know that, and those are people that we hide more things from. And then there are people we don't know. I mean, If you don't know someone, are you just automatically going to unburden yourself? Probably not. You know, unless you're talking to your priest in the confessional. Then that's okay, because that you have reason to trust that will be kept confidential. But for the most part, we know people that we don't say things to, or we do it once and we never do it again because we see the consequences. So communication around that, and that self-disclosure component of communication really is a measure partly of our own openness. There are people who are open and there are people who are very closed, who say very little. There's nothing wrong with either one. There's nothing wrong with either one. And it's all a personal choice. And a lot of it has to do with the personality. But you can see that in people when they how they interact, or they take a long time to warm up to where they can feel comfortable, and that's fine. But you know that if you understand this principle of self-disclosure and the idea of the Johari window, then I think it makes things a lot more understandable in many of your interactions with the people around you. Does that make sense? So again, this is all about the level of communication. The other thing about communication is it is very logical to expect people's communication to be honest. When you are talking to someone, you expect to be hearing something that is true, at least in their minds. And I'm not talking about politics or religion or some of the things that people have trouble conversing with in a civil manner in this society. I'm talking about just in general. There are going to be people that you run into who are not honest, either with themselves or with you. And so you have to realize that real communication is honest communication. And if there's something you are tempted to be dishonest about, the best thing you can do is just zip it. Don't say it. If there's a reason you're tempted to be dishonest about it, there's a good reason to think about it before saying something that you may end up having to take back. I'm going to pick on lawyers again. As I said in the last class, lawyers are not a protected class, so I can pick on them all I want. Cousin of ours, and that's even less of a protected class, is cousins. But he one time told us that he never told a lie that could be checked. You know what my reaction to that was? I bet every one of you know that reaction. I'll never trust a word you say. I now believe that everything you say to me is a lie. And, so, and that's the way he functioned. And after that, whatever he said was, well, that's what you say. Don't believe it, prove it. But yeah. So honesty is also something that we take. Our society, all of our societies are built really on a level of honesty. We can't function together without a level of honesty. And so we expect that communication to be honest, or if people don't want to be honest, we would rather that they just kept quiet. So think about that. The other thing is, once you get branded as a liar, you may as well have taken a big brand and put the letter L on your forehead. because that's what you are for the rest of your life. So, as I said, if you're tempted to lie, don't say anything, because every lie can be checked. So, just that. Communication over. The other thing about communication, and especially in a situation, both personal and otherwise, is that you need to be careful of the things that you say on social media. Because they can come back to bite you. One of the reasons that I don't use Twitter or Facebook is that, first off, I'm not interested in what you ate for lunch yesterday. Okay, forget that. Unless it was a really great restaurant, then tell me about it. But I don't care if you had a hamburger. Doesn't matter. Well, I don't know if it was at Henry's in Loveland. I'd agree it was a good hamburger. but that's an aside. But largely because it's trivial stuff. But occasionally, what you see, and here's an example with Twitter. I was just reading about that this morning. One of the reasons that I have nothing to do with Twitter is because after the shooting at YouTube yesterday, apparently Twitter erupted with a series of lies as to who the shooter was, what they were doing, how many people had been shot, just a series of lies, and then people pretending to be witnesses. So these things eventually get caught. There's another example of this. My daughter was in school in Wales, in the UK, and one of her classmates just thought it would be really, really hilarious to put a photo of herself on Facebook wearing nothing other than cellophane tape. So she was nude. And her friends just, went berserk and, said, you better take it down. It needs to come down. Those are the kinds of silly things, that really cause harm. That's what Thane was mentioning.
And there was this roast page high school or whatever. There was a group of people that did it, and people would submit things to them or whatnot. And I got made fun of on it for having one. And I thought it being offensive because they said I was shitting on it. Like that was just like I was in ninth grade. I'm a growing girl. Don't mess with me like that, And so and everyone then they put that page onto my Twitter account, and it became this huge bullying thing, and my whole page was getting bullied from there. I didn't have to delete my account.
Right.
Because every time I got on there, there was something new.
You're right. Yeah, that one of the things about that is exactly those kinds of things, and I'm sorry you had to go through that. But there are just plenty of examples that are similar, and and as far as I'm concerned, you did the right thing for just dumping your account. Yeah. Again, I don't understand why people care whether somebody is at the restaurant having lunch. It just doesn't make, it just doesn't do anything for me. But there is also the story of apparently someone who was a very notorious online troll who would pick up on stories of people who'd lost their children to cancer and make fun of them and just do this kind of thing. And finally, somebody got sick and tired of reading this stuff and hacked around, played around, knew enough about computer systems and figured out who it was and published his name and address. And he then was being harassed. So I mean, he was just an ordinary guy. He was a security guard at some company. And he was just doing this, I don't know why. But he ended up committing suicide because he got harassed so much. So, you know, there's a downside to doing that. But the whole point is you need to be careful how you present yourself online. If someone looked me up online, I'll tell you what they're going to find. The biggest thing they're going to find is pictures of my daughter's wedding in Copenhagen in 2013. That's it. And the only reason it's there is because I wanted my friends back here in Colorado to see where the wedding was and what it looked like. That's all. And it's about 20 photos, period. That is my Facebook online presence. And I just don't get why people have to post 5-6 times a day. It just doesn't make sense to me. But you need to be careful. As Thane said, employers will check now. They'll look you up on Facebook. They'll look you up on Twitter. I would have to say they shouldn't, because there is, of course, nothing that requires you to have a Facebook page. There might be someone who might say to you, well, I couldn't find you on Facebook. And that's your answer. I don't have a Facebook account. I don't use it. Yeah. Yeah, well, as I say, 2013, I think, is my last presence on Facebook. So, you know, and that's okay. But I don't think anyone should. But you have to be careful what you put on. They will check. We had a person down in Denver who I think she ran our GED program. And she wasn't very happy working at College America. And was fairly open about her dissatisfaction, but she didn't say anything to students. So there was nothing real bad. And then one day somebody one of the senior people on campus just checked her Facebook account, and there she is talking about how she hated the school and she was about to accept a new job. They called her in, and 30 minutes later she was gone. Go.
This is a good story. Oh, no. So last Valentine's Day, my daughter got sick, and I was and I got my own cover because I had babysitter had in school. So I go pick her up, got my own cover. I waited till my kids got there to go get my daughter, took her home. Had my Valentine's Day, so I posted an old picture of me and my boyfriend at the time, and I got fired because I thought I lied about my dog being sick because I posted an old picture.
Yeah.
So they told me on the next day. Because of the picture was 2 weeks old, and I just posted it on Valentine's Day. And they thought I lied. So they grabbed me over assumption.
Yeah. And there again, it was over an assumption about something that they were wrong about, but it was the appearance. Yeah. Well, you see, there is where, in my opinion, I mean, that's a bit of an overreaction. What I would have done, I think, is this is what it appears to me. If you say your daughter was sick, bring us the paperwork, which you would do. And that'd be the end of the story. Yeah. That was over at the one in Johnstown, the rehab hospital?
No, that one, that one.
Oh, okay.
This one is.
Okay.
There's a whole place to live, this thing, it's really good. And my cousin has got a job there, and I think I could see him, and I was like, "Oh, no, she has to be there for a year in the contract, or 2 years in the contract, and
Mhm.
they pay for it." I was like, bye, nope, I won't ever work there.
So like, what if she gets fired?
She has to pay back the community license, which is $950 per column.
Holy moly. That's good.
Fine. Mine was 40, 5 years. But when I did mine, I was going through the workforce.
Yeah. Well, there's an example of what happens when you're, yeah, right, yeah, that's the best way. Or if you happen to be on, just say, I'm at home because my daughter is sick. I don't, yeah. Well, there's a good example. Okay, so we can call it an evening, call it a week for this class. I don't know, some of you probably have class tomorrow night. Don't remind me, huh? As I was bragging about my 4-day weekend. So enjoy your weekend, everyone. And I'll see you all on Monday evening. Okay. We'll be going over chapter 4 next week, which is nonverbal communication. So, and I will have assignments and a quiz,
Watch out,
I
baby.
hope by the end of the weekend.
Did you give the front desk
Good idea.
chapter 4 or just chapter 6? Just curious.
This week it was chapter 6, next week it's chapter 4.
Okay, so does the front desk just have chapter 6?
They have all 4 chapters for you for the whole month.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Thank you so much for doing that.
Oh, you're very welcome.
All right, have a good weekend.
You too. I'm going to
Bye.
shut off the meeting now, so have a good
Okay.
weekend.
You too, Mike.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.